Caterina and I are delighted to welcome you to this discussion and the very exciting book launch of Caterina's book, How to Hold Successful Meetings. So what I wanted to do is just clarify the purpose of today's discussion. Hopefully you will walk away with some understanding of the principles behind holding successful meetings, but also I want you to walk away with some really practical steps based on Caterina's insights on what you can do in your next meeting to improve the quality of that. So let me give you an introduction to Caterina for those of you who don't know her. Caterina is an executive coach, and she's also a founder of The Leader Path, which is a leadership coaching company. She has worked as a global business leader at Google, where she was also a 5-star rated internal coach. She's coached leaders and teams from Google, Amazon, Vodafone, as well as a number of startups. And Caterina does many things. She is a member of the Forbes Coaches Council, and she also coaches for INSEAD and the Ashridge Business School, Hult Ashridge Business School. And her writing has been featured in Forbes, Fast Company, Thrive Global, and now she has been published by Penguin. As of today, her book is out, which is just a really exciting moment, I think, for all of us to be part of that book launch. I've purchased the book, and already I have received, and this is just my personal excitement, I've already received some of the bonus pieces, so I think we'll mention those at the end. But yeah, so that's an introduction to Caterina, and I'm going to pick her brains about how to have good quality meetings. But I also wanted to get you thinking about your meetings. So just in your minds, and feel free to jot this down, I just wanted you to have a think about the last couple of weeks and the meetings that you've had in those couple of weeks. Think about the meetings that perhaps were not so good and the meetings that were excellent. And if you could just jot down for yourselves, and don't worry, you're not going to have to share any of this, but if you could just jot down out of 10 how you found those meetings. So 10 being like as good as it could have gone, and 0 being not so good, terrible, lots of room for improvement. Perhaps just think about your worst meeting, the worst meeting you had in the last couple of weeks, and how you would rate that out of 10. And then also have a think about the best meeting that you had and how you would rate that out of 10. And that, I think, is just nice to give you a bit of a range. So I'm going to give you 2 seconds to do that. Don't want to rush you, and I'm also going to have a little think about my own meetings, and no pressure for me here because this is effectively a big meeting, and so I'm probably going to end it wishing that I'd done things differently once I hear all of Caterina's tips. But hopefully you've jotted that down. And then I just wanted you to have a think about, overall, how would you rate the meetings that you go to as an average? So you've got now maybe a low point, you've got a high point, there's obviously variability. You could just take a midpoint of that, or you could say, look, out of 10 in general, I would say my meetings are probably about a 6 or a 7. And that just gives you, a bit of a baseline. How are you coming into this? And how are we going to nudge you up a little bit? So hopefully you've done that. And then the final thing I'd like you to do is just estimate how many meetings you have per week, or how many hours you spend per week. And I appreciate this isn't easy, so perhaps just think about the last couple of weeks and use that as your baseline. How many hours are you spending in meetings? Probably having a quick glance at calendars here and things like that. But we've got a starting point now, a measure of the quality and the quantity of your meetings. I think that's a good place to now pick Caterina's brains on how we can improve both the quality and the quantity of our meetings. So Caterina, would you tell us a little bit about what made you write this book?
Of course. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. So I never thought I would write a book about meetings, to be totally honest, because when I was an employee, I had this aversion towards internal meetings. So how the book came about in the summer of 2019, I have in my mind, I'm going to write a book this year. I wasn't sure, I had different ideas, but the first thing I did is I blocked some meeting free time in my calendar and said, this is it, this year I'm doing it, I'll work on a book. And it was only a couple of months later, serendipity, that Penguin reached out. And they said, we've seen your writing online, would love for you to contribute a book for the Penguin Business Expert series. So you can imagine, I was thrilled. Like, this is amazing. This is the year I was going to write a book anyway. This is great. And initially I told them, I'm going to write a general leadership book. And they said, no. For the Penguin Business Expert series, we want you to solve a specific problem for leaders. And they gave me a couple of examples, and one of them was meetings. And I remember myself going for a walk after I received that email. And I said, I was thinking, I hated meetings. I have this visceral reaction. But that's a good thing, because that means I understand the problem. And it's a huge problem for me, for my coaching clients. And on the other hand, all my life, like I had 13 years as a salesperson and then 7 years as a coach, my key job was having meetings. And probably that's why my tolerance for internal status updates was very low, because my key job was high stakes meetings, whether it was sales where millions were on the line, or coaching where the most important challenges of the clients were on the line. So I was like, yeah, that's a challenge I want to solve for people, because yes, most of us have, as we saw in the chat, not so many great meetings. So that's how the book came about.
Yes, thank you. That's great to hear, and thanks for alerting me to the chat. So it's nice that some of you actually shared some of your stats. So I will discuss those as well. But it's just great to hear your personal experience, and already you've therefore described different types of meetings, haven't you? Sort of high stakes, the internal meetings, coaching sessions as another form of meeting. It's really great to hear. What would you say are the benefits? So, if I have to go away now and improve the quality of my meetings, why should I bother doing this? What's the benefit?
Yes, because humans we have more loss aversion rather than desiring benefits. Let me start with the risks and the costs if we don't have good meetings, because I think we're all, due to our loss aversion, more sensitive to that. First of all, meetings are expensive. Like, it's estimated $500 billion wasted in US and the UK alone because of bad meetings. And you can there's a great tool online, it's called HBR Meeting Cost Calculator. You can see for your team, if you have an 8 people team and you're wasting a couple of hours a week, which is conservative. I think we're wasting a lot more. This is around $45K a year, right? But it's also, if you have meetings, like a half an hour meeting in the morning, you can lose half a day worth of productivity, because you don't get started in deep work before, you don't get started before lunch. Like, it's not just the half an hour meeting. And if the meeting is bad, you have something that's called bad meeting recovery syndrome. That's a thing. Like, psychologists have found this, because you can remember, like, if you have a bad meeting, what are you going to do? You're going to social media, which I know you're an expert, Maya. You'll ping your colleagues to talk about the meeting, and it's bad meetings are correlated with low job satisfaction. If you are the leader of a bad meeting, your reputation will suffer, because people, as we said, complain to each other about bad meetings, and it's also linked to burnout. Like, a lot of bad meetings is also, so there's a huge cost, financial, job satisfaction, well-being cost. That's why there was a school of thought, let's drop meetings, let's not have them at all, because of the huge cost, especially of the bad meetings. But on the other hand, let's talk about the benefits. Meetings are the best tool we have to inspire action. It's as simple as that. If it wasn't the case, we wouldn't have salespeople, right? We would have ads and people would buy expensive items without needing to meet anyone. That's not the case. That's why politicians tour the country. Like, that's meeting people face to face is the best tool we have to inspire action. It's one of the best tools we have to inspire one another, fresh ideas, build connection. And build culture, really, because how you do your meetings is how you run your company. So meetings are a tool to build culture. If you want psychological safety and friendliness and honesty, improving your meetings is the best place to start, really.
Yeah, that's so helpful. I think it's just really nice to understand what is at stake here when we're thinking about quality of meetings, and when we choose to invest our time and energy into improving the quality of them. And I did, if it's okay, I just wanted to share some of what is in the chat when it comes to meetings. And it would be lovely to circle back to some of these great people who've shared their scores and things like that. But we've got people saying that they're spending 30 to 40 hours a week, some spending less, more like 10 to 15. But can I see anyone with single digits in meetings? No, I mean, so everyone is spending, like it looks like from this sample, is spending more than double digits hours in meetings, and scores are ranging. I think the lower end, we're seeing something like 5 out of 10, and then others are saying like 7 out of 10. So just good to share that, and people can have a think about how that relates to their own situation as well. And we can perhaps revert to that at the end if we get time. And also Michael has very helpfully shared the calculator as well. So people can go and check that out. But I think that's a great starting point. And so it will be good now, given the importance of this, like where do we start when it comes to it, improving the quality of our meetings? What is something simple we can do? Or based on your research, what is the simplest thing we can do, or the easiest thing we can do to start making progress here?
I think the key new idea of the book, which is the 4D meeting framework, it's also very simple to implement. And let me describe a little bit the framework. So to solve any problem, you have to go through 4 stages. First is to define the problem or the goal. Second, to develop ideas. Third is to decide the way forward. And fourth is to do. So it's define, develop, decide, and do. And intuitively, we go through these stages as individuals, like what should I order for food tonight? Maybe Indian. Like you come up with an idea and they say, no, Indian actually too spicy. You go back redefining the problem. What should I order for food tonight that is not spicy? So you go back and forth, and it works at an individual level. But imagine bringing people in a meeting, and everyone is in a different stage in that process. And not only they're in a different stage, they jump back and forth without any warning. And that's why it's so hard. Like meetings are so hard, not because people are bad or incompetent, they're individually very competent. But that was the key insight. And that's the 4D meeting framework. First, you have meetings to solve one of the 4Ds, or maybe more than one. And if you do more than one, you do it in defined sections. Yeah. I often have develop meetings, which I'll meet with my team and we'll just come up with ideas. And that's it. Like for a develop meeting, the outcome is a list of ideas. And then we go away, and then I will make the decision. I don't need a meeting for that, for example, in that case. Or if we said we'll make the decision collectively, we will separate. Now we will develop the ideas, then we'll make a decision. A lot of the chaos is created because someone is coming up with new ideas and the other person is ironing out the implementation in one of the ideas, while someone hasn't even seen the problem at all.
That is fascinating. Even just thinking about what is the purpose of your meeting, and is it which one of those 4 is it, or which 2 of those 4 is it, so that you can be focused. And often I think we find ourselves doing a bit of everything, in a meeting, and not knowing which part of the process we're in. So having that as a roadmap and allowing people to understand so they also focus their brains on that seems super helpful. So I just wanted to start inviting questions. Please feel free to put them into the chat. And what we're going to do is probably do another 10 or so minutes of discussion, Caterina, if that's okay. And then we'll start looking at the questions, and that way we can hear your questions. So I just wanted to invite you guys to start putting questions into the chat, and I'm going to carry on picking Caterina's brains for a little bit longer before we do that. Okay, so that's given us a framework, I guess, to understand meetings, because I guess meetings is a broad term, right? Would you say that the kickoff is the most important part of the meeting? And do you have any tips for how to start meetings well?
The kickoff is a very important part, right? Because first impressions matter. So first of all, start on time. Let's start with that. But then we need, when we start the meeting, to answer 4 key questions that are in the minds of the participants. The first question is, why am I here and why should I care? The second question, which is more subconscious, is, do I belong here? Am I a valued member of this group? And the third question is, how are we going to do this? Like, how is this meeting going to go? And the fourth could be, what do I need to know before we get started? So to make it easy to remember, to answer those 4 questions. I have, again, I like frameworks that start with the same letter. So this time the letter is C, is center around the purpose of the meeting. And the way to do that is just say that the purpose of the meeting is this. And by the end of the meeting, we walk away with this. The second is connect. I like to have, like you did, I think you did brilliantly. You haven't read the book yet. Get everyone's voice in the first 3 minutes. And that's what you did. Like you said, think and write in the chat. Connect. Usually, if it's a team and you really want to build connection, share something personal or positive to get them in a positive mood, or even vulnerable, because they will be more creative later. Research shows that if you share something more vulnerable, you build psychological safety and you're more creative. So connect is the second. The third is contract. This is how we're going to do the meeting. And it could be as practical as this is the agenda. We're going to do breakouts. We're going to use post-it notes or things like that, or even more team contracting, like we do in team coaching, right? We want to be honest. We want to have fun. We want to respect each other. It depends on the purpose of the meeting. And the third and the fourth one is consume, which is what Amazon does, like the 15-minute memo they read before their meetings, because they prefer to digest the information. I know Twitter does something similar. They start their meetings with everybody's in a Google Doc, and they read what they need to know before they make a discussion. So to start your meeting, center, connect, contract, and consume. And you don't have to do all 4 in every meeting, right? You can choose. These are not necessary to do for every single meeting, but it is a good guideline.
Yeah, that's great. And I do notice, as you mentioned, there are parallels between that and a coaching session. And you and I are both coaches, so we're familiar with this. And I know you also interviewed some very prolific and high-profile coaches for the book, like Stephen Hawkins and Professor Clutterbuck.
Yes.
So I'm curious about the connection, how, as a, coming to this as a coach, how you see that has influenced your book and your thinking.
Yes. So my initial idea was, because I've spent a lot of years building the coaching expertise, especially coaching teams, that I wanted to transfer those tools and strategies to managers and leaders and people that are holding meetings. That was the angle I approached the book. Let's see, what were we doing in team coaching? Because everybody loved the team coaching sessions, right? That was the divide. I had clients looking forward to it and then sharing with their teams later. And I was looking, it was fulfilling, like doing a team coaching session. I was like, what are we doing there? That's so much fun. And can we take it back to meetings? So that was my angle. And most of the people I interviewed a lot of experts. They were from the team coaching field, but also, I interviewed facilitators, virtual meetings experts, people that were doing design sprints. Like I wanted to get different experts' opinions. But the other thing, I think that being a coach influenced the book. As I said, like in coaching, we deal with the important stuff. So a person brings their most important challenge, the one that they haven't solved on their own. That's what they bring in a coaching session. And I wanted the book to deal with the important stuff, right? I didn't want a meetings book that this is how to do an agenda, like the very minutiae of the meetings. Like the book deals of how you connect with people, how you build credibility and likability, how you build psychological safety, inclusion, how you make decisions, how you define goals, how you develop ideas, like all the D's. I wanted it to be very substantial. And a lot of people the advanced readers that read the book said, oh, this is not just about meetings. Meetings is the lens, because meetings is the tool that you do all your leadership and running a business, really.
That's fascinating to think of that from such a meta perspective. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I had a few thoughts there. But a couple of things that you mentioned earlier on about internal meetings, because I think there's something about internal meetings, and I'm curious to hear, what the rest of the room thinks about this. But when you are an employee of an organization, you cannot cancel all your internal meetings, right? You would not be a good corporate citizen, and you may or may not have influence on the full kind of scope of that meeting, right? So you may or may not be able to drive it. I'm just curious, what would be your dream internal meeting, or like, what do you think are the qualities of these sort of regular meetings that we need to have, that are just sort of part of life inside organizations? Do you have any wishes for how those could be done differently?
I'll be a little bit controversial here, and I will challenge the assumption that we need to have regular meetings. Maybe we do. I just will not take it for granted. Because a lot of times regular meetings is a trap, because we have the meeting and we're trying to find topics to discuss in the meeting versus having a meeting because there's something to discuss. And a lot of these regular meetings are updates and status updates. And by the way, 46 of employees said that's a funny stat. They would prefer to do anything else rather than a status update. 70% of them would prefer to watch paint dry. So, and that's why I think, first of all, do we really need to update each other in a meeting? Like, could this be an email or project management tool? Could it be a video selfie? Could it be an audio? Like for us, for example, we didn't have a meeting, or maybe did we have a phone? I think we were doing audio messages on WhatsApp to prepare for this one. We didn't need to, right? You could see it would be a do meeting because we are planning the implementation of this. We could have had a meeting, but maybe not. So I will challenge the assumption we need to have regular meetings. To answer your question, you said, what was the ideal? A good tip for internal meetings is separate the strategic meetings and the operations meetings as well, because that's also the chaos. And that's why most boards, they say they spend more time deciding their Christmas card versus their strategy in Asia. We have this tendency to deal with trivial things. So that's one tip, like do a strategy meeting that could be quarterly or monthly, and you really prepare for it. And then you have more do meetings, which is implementations, have the right attendees. These are some of the tips. And then I have a full chapter of how to reduce the meetings in the book, because we show up this, what you said, corporate citizen. It is true, there's recency bias and there's availability bias. So we feel we need to show up our face in order to get promoted, because it's true. Like our boss, if they see us more and they have seen us more recently, they're more likely to get, like, it's true. So how do you deal with that? You need some discussion with your boss of, actually, I would create more value if I did this work, or I did fewer, more successful meetings.
Yeah. No, that's really useful. Questioning the importance of whether you need to have that meeting as a starting point, and then if you are going to have it, thinking about whether it is operational or strategic. That's really helpful. That was going to be one of my questions. How do you go about reducing meetings? And you've already started to answer that. You've started to talk about having those important conversations, whether it's with your boss or your team. Is there anything else you want to add there around going about that process? Because, we've already identified that people are having a good amount, a healthy, large number of meetings. How do you practically go about doing that?
So first of all, you need to identify the reason. And a lot of them are myths, right? For example, we have the assumption that the more meetings we have, the more collaboration we will have, which is not true. Research has shown it's not true. And most of the meetings, I would be interested to see the people we have here, the most meetings are with internal. They're not even cross-functional, 80% of the meetings. So they're not really boosting collaboration. So that's one of the myths. Like a lot of leaders, they struggle, they're burned out of meetings, but they think that's the only way to have a collaborative culture, which is not true, really. And then there are other, like, why do we have so many meetings? Sometimes it's more convenient for the leader, really, because imagine I have to write an email. It will take me an hour. I invite my team, 8 people. I give them the update in 20 minutes. I save time as the person giving the update, but I absorbed half an hour from all the organization. So we need to realize, why do we have so many meetings, right? It's convenient for the person giving the update. Psychologically as well. Sometimes we only feel like a leader of the team when we have a meeting. So there are deep psychological reasons, like this is my meeting. This is when I am with my team. This is when I feel leadership. And I understand this, like it's a valid psychological reason. I'm just saying, have fewer, more successful meetings, and then you will feel a more successful leader. So these are one of the reasons. And then there's many more, like best practice sharing, which was so boring when I hated those because 9 out of 10 best practices were not relevant to me. So you can do social networks, you can do groups, you can do, as I said, our president at Google was doing selfie videos from his phone. I love them. You can use asynchronous communication.
just even clarifying the options when it comes to asynchronous communication. As you said, we used WhatsApp messages, so audio, the power now with the video messages, that's really helpful. Okay, so I'm just I'm conscious of time and wanting to make sure that we answer lots of the questions that we have in the room as well. I just wanted to check if there was any other key question that I had for Caterina. Okay, just one final one before I then start looking at the questions in the chat. What would you say are common mistakes that people make in meetings? Apart from what you've already said, are there any other default mistakes that we typically fall into?
I would say, yes, the most important is not having a clear purpose. But I wanted to touch on psychological safety because I would say purpose and the 4D framework is the easiest and more effective way to improve your meetings. But unless you have psychological safety in the group, it won't be effective. Like I spent 80 years at Google. Google was the pioneer in this research with after Amy Edmondson. They studied 180 teams, successful and unsuccessful, and they couldn't figure out what made the difference. Like if they were located in the same office didn't matter, if they have individual good performances didn't matter, how they were making decisions didn't matter. They just couldn't figure it out until they stumbled on the research on psychological safety, and that everything made sense. That was what separated successful teams and unsuccessful. So I think a common mistake is a lot of times we get out in business, we don't realize how scary we are. If we are the leader, how scary we are, or we don't take the time to build the safety in the group to get the best ideas. And we don't. We bring people together and they don't share what the problem is, or they won't share ideas. And that's a huge mistake. We're really missing out on leveraging everyone's brain power to solve important problems, which is the whole point.
The first question I've got here is, about the difference between virtual and in the room, and what do you do when you have a blended meeting? So if you've got some people who are virtual and some people who are physically in the room, what would be your advice there?
First of all, recognize that if this happens, it can be very exclusive for the non-inclusive for the person that's not in the room. Like it's good to recognize that this is a challenge, right? So different companies deal with this differently. Like the company Trello says, if one is virtual, everyone is. Like they did it before the pandemic. If someone was logging in remotely, everyone was logging in from their laptop. So I was thinking, oh, that's interesting, because they were leveling the play field. But when I shared this with a colleague in a different company, he hated that. He said, why are you doing the lowest common denominator? Like he was really against virtual meetings. So I think it is a challenge. So if you don't do what Trello did, what you need is to be very conscious, creating opportunities for the person that's remote to participate, and be aware of the challenges. Like you could have sound delay, and psychologically, when someone has sound delay, we think they're not trustworthy. Like there's the challenges of the virtual technology, just being aware that, yeah, we may think like this person has a more challenge to contribute, and we need to create opportunities.
That's really helpful. So I guess, there's different ways of managing it. It's not a one size fits all, but that gives us some opportunity, some ideas for how you might handle it and address it directly. Okay, so what about this? What is the approach for applying your 4D model to a very strongly established meeting? And in brackets, that's described as a ceremony, which I quite like. For example, a status meeting. I think you've touched on that a little bit, but is there anything else that you would add? Because I think, yeah, you're right. This question picks up on a valid point that some things are just entrenched, right? Some meeting structures and formats.
The status meeting, it's not a 4D meeting, unless what you could do is have the status update shorter, and then you actually have an agenda, something on 4D. Let's define this problem, or let's ideate on this topic, or let's make this decision. Depends on the duration. So a way to get around, if you need to have status, like I would say, let's all give our updates 1 minute each, right? I would have preferred the updates are done. Like there are so many apps now. Like there are daily apps that you can just upload your what you're working on, what you achieved, and everybody gets informed. Like, why would you do this in a synchronous time? I'm still resistant and challenging that this is the way it needs to be, a status meeting. Because you said ceremony, I was thinking, because I was trying to see whether the 4D framework works for all meetings. So I was testing in different meetings. And then I was thinking the all hands, right? When you have the typical town halls. And for me, that was or needs to be a do meeting, because your objective is not to give the update, is to inspire action in the employees to be more loyal, to work harder, or to do something like in all hands. Again, super expensive, right? Imagine, depending, because you have all the employees. If you're Facebook and you're doing an all hands, it costs 3 million for an hour to do an all hands with all your employees, right? This is precious time real estate. Think of it as a do meeting, and your objective is to inspire people. So that's one of the way to implement the 4D in a ceremonial all hands.
Another question here about virtual. So what's a good way and a quick way to get everyone engaged and into a creative mindset on virtual calls?
So I have, because I love this starting ideas, I have in the appendix, I think I have 23 exercises you can do. And when I was interviewing the people on virtual, I think my biggest challenge was like today, when you have a virtual meetings that you have many attendees, right? Because if you have a few attendees, you can say like a simple idea, what was the highlight of the week and what was the low light of the week? So you both share something positive, vulnerable, like that's a simple idea in a team meeting. But I interviewed a virtual facilitator. She facilitates huge crowds virtually, Julie Reese. And she had some great ideas. How about in a Zoom, for example, we change our names to our first job, right? And then you have a virtual screen of, my first job was like an acting gig, by the way, but it's funny, right? Or how about you get the notebook and you draw how you're feeling at the moment, like an emoji. Or like you did, type something in the chat. So I think the most challenging is the big virtual meetings, but there are ways you can get people to participate, even if they don't have to visually hear everybody's voice.
Yeah, that's just a good way to get us started. I love that emoji idea. Very simple. Personally, I noticed, I'm reading from the chat here, personally, I noticed that often meetings start with a host not saying what the objective of the meeting is. And I wonder why this is. Are people feeling silly, stating what they think is obvious?
My guess would be a lot of people don't know. If it's a regular meeting, they haven't prepared what is the objective of the meeting. Or even if it's obvious, like in coaching, because we are trained, right? That's how you start. Like I start with my client, what would you like to work on today? What are we doing here? Why are we here? So it's so obvious in a professional, in coaching, because you're being paid for that meeting as a coach. That's the first thing you do. You establish, why are we both here? So for me, it's hard to fathom, why wouldn't you do that? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And obviously in this context of this conversation we're having, it just seems so obvious. But I think it's a great reminder of how many meetings are taking place in more of an autopilot fashion, and how much opportunity there is, to improve those. Got another question here saying, what is the definition of a meeting, and how the digital native savvy folks, how would they deal with the meetings concept?
Yeah, the definition I used was bringing a group of people together real time to achieve a common purpose, right? What is fascinating is the definition of leadership. The most common definition of leadership is guiding a group of people towards a common purpose. Mm-hmm. There's a huge overlap. That's when I realized that I got excited about meetings, because it's one of your best tools as a leader. So that's the definition I used by default. And that's why when you're meeting with a friend for a beer, I wouldn't call this a meeting, because there's not a specific purpose to work toward. That's how I make that distinction. There needs to be, by definition, a purpose, like we're meeting to achieve something. We have more options, from project management tools to audio messages to more asynchronous communication, so that when we are together, we're actually leveraging everyone's brain power. Because humans have always changed the course of history through meetings. Like, I don't want to underestimate, like I'm all about reducing the amounts of meetings so that you can actually make change when you meet people and bring people together and feel the magic.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, but also it's always interesting to acknowledge the evolving nature of our world, isn't it? And now that we do have tools to address some of these things, in some ways there are probably some legacy things going on that have always been part of traditional cultures and organizational cultures, which just need revisiting, you know, in the new context. So it's always good to refresh those, isn't it? Okay, I want to make sure that we're still getting more questions coming through. This is a great question, which I'm sure lots of people can relate to. I struggle with finding the right balance of applying processes versus having a freestyle discussion in a workshop where you're trying to get a group of people to brainstorm and contribute. For example, when designing strategy for a company.
Having a process can allow more people to contribute. If you don't have any process, like the loudest voice will talk the most. So a lot of the times the process, it depends. You need more process if you're virtual, for example, because it's harder for people to contribute in a virtual world, it's proven. You need more process if you have a big group. Like maybe if you're 3 people, you can have a more freestyle discussion. And especially separating, you said strategy, separating the 4Ds. It is important to be like a little bit strong-handed facilitator, because when you're ideating, you shouldn't allow people judge the ideas, because that's mixing the divergent thinking and convergent thinking, and it's counterproductive. So it's there. You need to have a process to say, actually, now we'll have ideas. We'll generate ideas. We'll decide later. So this process is necessary, because if you don't do that, some will start criticizing the ideas and people will not contribute their ideas, and you don't have the best strategy, right? Or if you don't focus on defining the problem first or the goal, you'll spend the whole meeting solving the wrong problem or creating a strategy for the wrong thing. So, but then within that framework of the 4D, you can allow free discussion. Like it's important. You will need, again, more strong-handed. If I'm coaching a big team, I will do a round robin, because I want to make sure I hear everyone. And it's hard with a free discussion for this to happen, because the people that talk a lot, they will talk, and some people will never voice their opinion.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think it's just really good to acknowledge the importance of process, even where we think we want to be free. Actually, you might not be having a very equal process, and it might end up just being very biased. Okay, what are your tips when chairing the meeting around then participating as well? Is there, there's a tension between chairing and participating?
There is. So I would say there's different roles in chairing, and you don't have to do everything yourself, because there is a challenge. Like if you are, first, if you're the leader, doesn't mean you should be the facilitator of the meeting. Like one of the best meetings I've seen, and it was when I was working at Google, our US team, the leader had his number 2 facilitated the meeting, because the leader was this charismatic person, really carried away, and his number 2 was an operations person. So he was chairing the weekly meeting. And so that's the first I need to say. Like if you are the leader and you're too involved in the content, maybe you ask someone else to facilitate. But also you can distribute the roles, because there is a role about following the contracting you've done, right? Or there's a note-taking role, or there is a let's hold in the flip chart, or different types of roles of the chair. And you don't have to hold them all yourself. You can give them to different people. And yeah, but if you think you'll be too involved in the discussion, ask someone else to facilitate the meeting.
Wow. I think we've managed to get to the end of the questions. So that's brilliant. I was worried that we weren't going to get to the end of those. So thank you so much, Caterina. We've managed to hear from everyone in the room. And just to wrap up in the last couple of minutes, I hope you've all managed to take some tips away. I certainly made some notes, and I'm going to be applying these to the way I do meetings differently. So just a little check-in now for you all in the room. Think back to your average meeting score out of 10. And just think about a step or an action that you're going to take as a result of this meeting. and where you see that score increasing to, or already perhaps you've changed your outlook in your mind, but how you think you can nudge that score up, and one specific action that you're going to take as a result of this. And also looking at your hour total, the hours that you're spending in meetings, a specific thing that you think you can take away now from this to perhaps nudge that down. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up, Caterina? This has been so informative.
No, I'm thrilled. I'm so happy. I feel so privileged to have this group of people that came here and celebrate the book with me. I'm so happy to share this book with the world. I'm so excited today. It's been an outpour of support, and I'm so excited. I would say, I would share them. Actually, my favorite phrase from the book, that bad meetings make us feel lonely and powerless, and good meetings fill us with a sense of strength and belonging. And let's improve the world one successful meeting at a time.
That is fantastic. Yes, the world definitely needs this book, Caterina. So we all need to get our hands on this and start changing the world one meeting at a time. I love that closing phrase. So thank you all. We're going to wrap up here. Thank you for all of your participation. It's really helped to have your engagement, and all of your questions have really enriched the discussion. So thank you for joining, and look forward to perhaps being in a very successful meeting with you in the future.
Thank you, everyone.